Anyways, so today we are going to begin with the new topic, the Chalcolithic, right? This is the one of the most confusing chapters in history, right? And in fact, you won't find a single book where they have covered this Chalcolithic very in a proper manner. Sorry, it's always debatable, right? I mean, not debatable. I must say it is more confusing, right? And in fact, it is just because of its nature that it is becoming more and more confusing, and that is why sometimes I have noticed, and somehow it is definitely not one of the most important sections, or I must say it is not the section which is basically contributing for the formation of Indian culture, right? But it is actually a wrong assumption that it is not contributing in the formation of Indian culture, right? Because whenever we are studying history, we just focus on Indus Valley civilization. Why? Because it had certain remarkable things such as urbanization, right? And it was not only about urbanization; it's basically about a great urbanization that we must discuss for Indus Valley civilization, and that is why we focus highly on Indus or Harappan civilization. Then we are directly moving to the Vedic cultures, right? So again, the Vedic cultures, as you do understand that the Vedic culture has contributed a lot for the shaping of Indian culture and society, right? And the future sort of development, and that is why we are highly focused even on the Vedic culture. And sometimes we all the time ignore the Chalcolithic cultures, and that is why in most of the book you won't find that they have specifically given or dedicated a chapter to the Chalcolithic period. But it is not only about that. That period is very confusing also, and because of what sometimes we need to understand this Chalcolithic in a different way. Now, why actually I am using this term confusing for the Chalcolithic? The reason is very simple. Look, normally there is an assumption. So I was just telling you about this Chalcolithic cultures. So I just told you that this portion is confusing due to some other reasons also, and we have to consider and we have to take into account those reasons also, because of what the Chalcolithic period has become so much confusing. Now, what are the things which are making it confusing, right? The first thing, normally if you try to trace the development of the society, so there is a particular sort of, or you can talk about certain stages, right? So suppose we discuss about Stone Age, right? After Stone Age, or we can say as a part of Stone Age, Neolithic, right? And you do understand the differences between the Paleolithic, Mesolithic and Neolithic, right? So Neolithic, normally they were using the stone, right? And stone as the most important stuff, or the stuff from which they were making their tools, right? And I hope there are a few things that you have understood very clearly. Whenever you are talking about any culture or society, like tools, the stuff out of what they were making tools, right? And then the graveyard, right? And the pottery. These are the things which are very important to mark differences in the cultures, right? And that is why this use of pottery here. The tools were also very in a very primitive phase, and then the Neolithic, numbers of things are changing, right? So definitely it is supposed to be the next stage in the development of human society. And when we are moving to the next, so it should be Neolithic, Chalcolithic. Now the question arises here, why do we call it Neolithic Chalcolithic? That's very important. Have you got any idea? Why do we call it Neolithic Chalcolithic? Why can't we call it Neo-Chalcolithic only? So, fine. So why we are not using Chalcolithic? Why you are calling Neolithic Chalcolithic? Exactly. The use of stone is still being very popular among them, because somehow the copper could not help them to make numbers of stuff, right? Basically the tools, and that is why they are still dependent on the stone, and that is why we say Neolithic Chalcolithic is the next level. But unfortunately, what happened to Indian history, it should be Neolithic Chalcolithic, right? It should be Neolithic Chalcolithic, but after Neolithic we find and phase which is Harappan phase, right? And Harappan, as you do understand, it was a bronze culture, right? And as Harappan was bronze culture, right? So try to get my points. So from Neolithic, right? From Neolithic, we have reached to that label. We have reached to that label which has started, or we have reached to that state or stage what have started, or where people have started using bronze. And bronze had that potential to replace stone, right? And that is where people got focused on, or they started emphasizing on the Harappans, right? And once we have reached to that level of development or advancement, and then again now it is not perfect to call that Chalcolithic is coming next, because once we have touched the level of bronze civilization, and again we are coming back to the Chalcolithic culture. So that's quite confusing, right? And that's the basic reason. That's the basic reason because of what we normally avoid this section, Chalcolithic or the Neolithic Chalcolithic, and you won't find a proper study on the Neolithic Chalcolithic, right? And most of the historians have also avoided to study the Neolithic Chalcolithic or the Chalcolithic period, because ideally it should be Stone Age, then or Paleolithic, Mesolithic, Neolithic, then Neolithic Chalcolithic, and then bronze, and then finally the Vedic culture. Then it was making a proper a development, but somehow here you find a sort of disturbance in this order, and that is where what happened, because after the Harappans we preferred to discuss about the Vedic society or the Vedic culture, because there is no much gap also, because if it is Harappans are ending on somewhere around 1700, right, and immediately after that you will find that the Vedic culture started. So it sounds perfect that after bronze we have started discussing the Iron Age, right, and that should be ideal also, but you cannot avoid few things, or you cannot neglect few things which are very important. And what are these? Because once we are talking about the Harappan civilization, so the Harappan civilization was confined to the northwestern part of India, that you do know, right? But what about the other cultures, right? The urbanization of Harappans didn't come to other cultures, right? So what about the Neolithic sites which we have found in the Bengal area? What about the Neolithic sites which we found in the Allahabad area, right, or the Velan Valley or the Mirzapur region? What about the Neolithic sites that we found in South India, right? So they did not have any as such stage which could be called as Bronze Age, right, or the age like Harappans, right? So definitely these people did not experience any as such state all of a sudden, but they are just going through the just going through the normal stages like Neolithic, and then Neolithic Chalcolithic, and then Chalcolithic, and then the bronze, and finally iron, right? So and that is what is happening after Harappan. Most of the historians prefer to discuss about the Vedic people, but unfortunately it is not applied in the case of Chalcolithic, right? So somehow, as I told you, and one more factor is there because of what we have ignored the Chalcolithic, right? So actually I told you that once you talk about this Harappan culture, right, so initially we emphasize on the Harappans, right, that it was a bronze culture, right, it was a bronze civilization, it was an urban civilization. What about the early Harappans? Early Harappans were basically nothing but the Neolithic Chalcolithic, right? But somehow, no, we are so astonished with the Harappans civilization that we completely ignore the early Harappans, which was basically a Neolithic Chalcolithic culture. Are you getting my point or not, right? And that's the reason that we ignored it. But at least once we have done Harappan, you must have understood one thing, we didn't ignore this early Harappan culture. And I just told you that there were so many cultures like Soti Seswal, and Ambari culture, right, Baluch culture. So these cultures were basically the Neolithic Chalcolithic culture, and we cannot avoid, because ultimately it's a gradual development. But okay, fine, that idea could be implied only for the northwestern region. What about the western India? What about the southern India? And what about at least the eastern India? In these three regions we can't apply the development of the bronze as we have applied for the northwestern region. So there we need to study that Chalcolithic period specifically. So whenever we do talk about the Chalcolithic period, mostly we focus on the western region, right? The other thing which is making difference, right, whenever you are talking about Chalcolithic, so ultimately, as I told you, that it is the pottery which is marking the major difference between these two, right? So the pottery must be very different and very important, and because of what we have started calling it a separate Chalcolithic region. So IBC people are using black and red pottery. We have extensively discussed their style of making the pottery, right? But if we'll come to this, these people, the Chalcolithic people, in that case we'll find that they have started using the OCP, Ostre Grey pottery, right? So that was a unique sort of pottery. But at the same time, you can't, ignore this idea that the Harappan pottery was also part of this, right? So when we say that OCP was the culture, right, of the Chalcolithic people, it doesn't mean they were only using the OCP. Yes, we do find the red and black, red and black pottery, right? And at the same time, we find even in other, Chalcolithic cultures, we do find the use of the red and black pottery, right? But even though what is happening, on the basis of that, at least we can claim that some influences were there of the Harappans, and that is why this idea of diffusion ki. Right? It may be possible that the Indus people migrated to different regions. What might be the factors because of what they would have migrated, that I have already discussed in the last class. But due to any reason, that they might have preferred to migrate or move to move to different regions. And ultimately, as a result of that, what is happening, for some time or for for a shorter span of time, they must have continued using the black and red pottery, right? But after that, they have developed their own culture, and that is why when we study about this Chalcolithic culture, normally we divide it into two parts, right? So the first part is basically where they are highly influenced by the Harappan civilization, right? And in the later phase, you'll find that they have started developing their own culture, considering the circumstances they had to face, right? And as a result, we'll find the Chalcolithic culture came into existence, right? So somehow we can't outrightly ignore the influence of Harappan civilization. Yes, that to some extent it must be accepted, right? But at the same time, you can't say that this culture was totally influenced by Harappan civilization. Yes, to some extent we can say, or to some parts we can say Harappan influences were there, right? But you can't generally imply this idea to every Chalcolithic culture, because maybe the Chalcolithic cultures that we do find in the western part, right, basically in the western UP and then Gujarat, Maharashtra and Rajasthan region, there certain influences were there. But at the same time, what about those sites which we find in the eastern UP, such as Allahabad belt and all, right, and Bihar and Bengal area? Because in Bengal also we do know about numbers of Neolithic sites, so there might be a gradual progress, and as per that gradual progress, we must have seen certain Chalcolithic period there also, right? Because copper was even available in certain other areas, so they might have started using the copper, but somehow copper could not change the society drastically, and that is where this period, these societies remained rural, right? These societies remained rural, right? But gradually it cannot be said that they remain completely as a rural society. Gradually you will find, at least for those societies which had access to iron and some other thing, gradually they have started improving, right? But at the same time, there is another thing which is again marking the problem. Whenever you talk about, generally if you are talking about the time frame, generally whenever you are talking about the time frame of the Chalcolithics, right? So what time frame we can fix for the Chalcolithic period? Specifically, I am talking about Western India now, right? Have you got any idea? 3000 थोड़ा ज़्यादा हो गया, पहले हो गया. 2500 to 300 BC. Right? That is the time frame which has been fixed for the Chalcolithic cultures, could be seen in the western part of India. And do you get any idea that what exactly I am trying to discuss now? That it means that they were contemporary to Harappans, and simultaneously they were contemporary to Aryans also, right? And that is where some people even tried to prove this thing also, that they were nothing but they were no one but the Aryan people only, right? And they actually developed a culture called as Chalcolithic culture, right? So that idea has also been proposed, but right now we have completely ignored the Aryan idea, because now there is no as such racial similarities between these two, and that is why we can say that this Chalcolithic culture was somehow was developed by the indigenous people only. So it was completely a indigenous development, and the Vedic people had nothing to do with this, right? So I hope now you got the point. Yes, this Chalcolithic period carries numbers of confusions, right? And because of what normally we avoid it, right? And in fact, in UPSC also, initially they didn't ask much questions from the Chalcolithic period, but nowadays they have started asking questions on the Chalcolithic, and that is why we need to cover it, right? But when we are talking about the Chalcolithic period, I just told you two things, right? The first, that the initially Chalcolithic period was much rural, right? And we can't talk about the developed Chalcolithic culture, but that idea cannot be generalized for the whole Chalcolithic period or throughout the Chalcolithic period, because they had a long period. Just now I told you around 2200 years, right? And I hope 2200 years for complete 2200 years or 2000 years, the society could not remain same, and gradual improvements were very much possible. And the same happened to the Chalcolithic culture, specifically in the western part, right? That Gujarat, Rajasthan, and Maharashtra area. And because of what we'll find, that gradually they have started coming towards the urbanization, and that is why we need to develop, we need to discuss this Chalcolithic period with a different approach. So rather than just dealing about the backwardness of the Chalcolithic people, we need to discuss about the advanced tendency they had, or they had this tendency to to reach to the level of urbanization, right? And that is what the most important thing. So always we'll keep in mind that particular thing, that they had the tendency to urbanize, right? And just by considering this particular fact, we'll try to discuss the Chalcolithic people. Is the idea clear for the Chalcolithic? Right. Okay. Now, is the Chalcolithic is not given properly in your notes, right? Because it's mostly about the Neolithic, Chalcolithic. They have, it has been covered, and it is but just because of that thing I told you that we have actually some certain problems with Chalcolithic, Neolithic, Chalcolithic, or the Chalcolithic period, and that is why we'll just try to see separately the things, and we'll after the notes will be sufficient. The class notes will be sufficient for the Chalcolithic, right? So you give a heading Neolithic, Chalcolithic. Sorry, Chalcolithic. Sorry. Of course, that is what I just told you. That once you talk about the IVC people or the Harappan people, they were connected to different parts of India. And in fact, I just told you, if these people must be connected with the that region, I mean to say Karnataka region. So I think it's not a big deal that they were connected even to the Chalcolithic. Well, regional, what exactly you understand by the regional culture? These cultures were basically came into existence in different phases. These cultures came into existence. I'll let you know about these cultures, right? Everything will be clear after this class. Not Neolithic, Chalcolithic. Right now you are supposed to write about the Chalcolithic only. Got my point? Because once you talk about the Neolithic, Chalcolithic, so we must discuss two different cultures, right? The early Harappans were Neolithic, Chalcolithic, right? And the second, the societies and the cultures which were there in the South India. Or else we can discuss about the Eastern India, right? So they had this Neolithic, Chalcolithic culture, but somehow they did not have this tendency to urbanize. And basically we'll find that it was more organized in the western region, and that is why here we are simply trying to cover the Chalcolithic, and the minute questions will also come from the Chalcolithic period only. And if it is coming about the Neolithic, Chalcolithic, very simply you need to write about the early Harappan cultures, nothing else, right? Write it down. In post-independence period, an interest developed among the scholars for the systematic study of social organization and political and economic institutions. Systematic study of social organization and political and economic institutions. Just listen a few more words carefully. Just look at this, a particular sentence. I told you post independence. Matlab till 1950, or in fact I must say 1960, right? Because the earliest effort was done by D.D. Kosambi, and D.D. Kosambi became active only in 1960s, right? I hope you must be knowing about D.D. Kosambi. He is supposed to be the earliest Marxist historian in India, right? So he became active somewhere around in 1960s, right? So as you can find, only after 1960 people became active to talk about the gradual development of the society and culture. And again, it could be, taken to a different direction, such as basically the Western scholars kept on emphasizing on the Western influence, right? And that is where they found the topics such as the Aryan invasion, right? Or the topics of Harappans. No, these were much suitable topics. Why? Because just on the basis of these topics, they could prove the Western dominance and the Western influence. But if you're talking about the Chalcolithic, right, it's a rural culture. It doesn't have, any sort of specification, because of what, it should be glamorized, right? And that is where they always ignored such kind of, cultures. These were not very important. It is only about this, Harappans and the Vedic. Why? Because it was easy to prove the Western dominance through these cultures, and that's the reason that they mostly focus on that. But once the Indian historians came into existence, right, like the Indian Marxists basically, and I told you that whenever you talk about Marxism, you talk about the stages. You remember it or not, right? I just told you about several stages, and in Marxism the development of society is taking place through several stages, and if you are looking forward to find the stages in Indian history, so then they had to fill the loopholes or the gaps which were there, because the Harappans are somehow not filling the gaps, rather it's creating the gap. Right? Because immediately after this Neolithic, if we see Harappan, and after Harappan again the culture got ruralized. Right? So it is basically creating the gap rather than filling the gap. So somehow the Chalcolithic worked for filling the gap. Right. Okay, fine. This was apparent in writing of scholars like D.D. Kosambi, H.D. Sankalia, Sankalia, H.D. Sankalia. They tried to reconstruct the past ways of life in different regions of India. Which was followed by detailed exploration of Chalcolithic sites, particularly in central and western India. The sites such as Inam Gaon, the site such as Inam Gaon, through extensive light, or extensive is a wrong word, you write down substantial light on past subsistence, comma, religious practices and social organizations. The Chalcolithic culture, of a region was defined according to certain salient features. Seen in ceramics, 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 and other cultural equipments like copper artifacts, beads of semi-precious stones, stone tools, and terracotta figurines. Change the paragraph. Different arguments have been proposed for the origin of I think you are not from this class. You are here.
In the morning batch, I wanted to take in the evening.
That is in the classroom number 1.
Class?
1. What did you write? For the origin of the Chalcolithic cultures, particularly in Central and Central and Western India. The idea of migration and diffusion of population groups were often cited as causes for the origin of these cultures. Which is based upon the similarities in the pottery pottery between Harappans and the Chalcolithic societies in this region. The black and red pottery has been used by them but to a limited extent. The most dominant pottery used by them was OCP, Ostre colored pottery, OCP, and that is why this theory had certain limitations and cannot undermine the role played by the indigenous communities. The second important argument regarding the origin of Chalcolithic cultures is about role of Aryans This argument is based on the linkages of archaeological sites of Chalcolithic, and the names mentioned in Puranas and epics. Which were located in the same region. But even this theory is criticized in recent years as numbers of problems are inherent in it, such as racial composition. As per the pottery used by them, as per the pottery used by them, it must be recognized as a individual culture. Individual culture. Although still much debates are there regarding Chalcolithic cultures, but mostly it has been accepted that this culture was from 2500 BCE. हाँ, circa 20, instead of you cut 2500, now he, that's right, 2450, 2450, circa 2450 BCE. To 600 BC, sorry, 300 BC, 300 BC. Clear? These two arguments are there for the origin of IVC, but to some extent we can believe on these theories, not completely. So somehow we can say we can't ignore or minimize the role of the indigenous communities, because there might be certain influences. It was not very surprising to have influences of the other cultures. Okay, why not? It was possible if the Harappans were traveling to different parts, right? If they are coming to Rajasthan to collect their copper, so I think it's not a big deal if they had certain kind of relationship and all, right? And after diffusion, if they shared some kind of relationship, so it is very much likely that after the end of the Harappan civilization, they might have preferred to locate themselves into these areas, because these areas were still fertile. Because I hope you remember the area which I am talking about, to some extent it is fertile, right? Because certain rivers are there. That black soil is also at least suitable for cultivation of some of the things. So I think it's not a big deal if these people, some of them would have preferred to migrate into that region. But at the same time, as I told you, that sometimes we completely ignore the importance of the late Harappan phase. Why we ignore it? Because normally we say decline, but as I told you, it was not the decline, rather it was the decline of the urban phase only. So it doesn't mean that people have completely left that place and moved to the different area. Some might have preferred to live in the same area with the with the new pattern, right? Because that pattern, which must be called as a rural pattern, and then of course when the Vedic people are coming and some other things, other kind of integration or sort of intermixing must be taking place between these two. But somehow this is about the Chalcolithic period that we can say, right? But once we come to the Chalcolithic period, it is not about a single culture. Normally we call it Chalcolithic culture, but as I told you that the Chalcolithic, once we say Chalcolithic culture, it doesn't mean about a uniform sort of culture, right? And in fact, many developments took place within this Chalcolithic cultures, right? And certain different patches or zones came into limelight in different phases, right? कभी अलग अलग सेंटर्स हैं जो लाइमलाइट में आते हैं और इसकी वजह से इंस्टेड ऑफ टॉकिंग अबाउट ए सिंगल कल्चर we must talk about the multiple cultures, right? So Indus Valley, the Chalcolithic culture is not a single culture. Okay, fine, the use of copper continued, but it does not mean that the lifestyle, the same lifestyle continued from 2450 to 300 BC. No, gradual changes in the lifestyle could be seen, and that's the reason that we have started, or we are forced to discuss about their patterns of advancement or the development. And in fact, the main focus, as I am telling you regularly, that main focus would be in that only, right? So write one paragraph. The Chalcolithic culture in Western and Central India cultures in Central and Western India cannot be considered as an uniform culture uniform cultures, as many differences could be noticed, over the time. And these were based on their tendency to move towards urbanization. The different cultures noticed in Chalcolithic are as follows. Kaitha culture, Kaitha right, from 2450 to 2000 BC, then Ahar 1950 to 1700, BC to 1700, then Malwa 1700 to 1400 BC, and Jorve from 1200 to 600 BC. 1200 to 600 BC. Right? Got the point? So on different stages you'll find different cultures in Chalcolithic, right? And in every stage you'll find certain level of advancement that is coming, right? And they are moving towards the urbanization. So that's the most important thing that could be discussed for the year. So just give the first heading, the Kaitha culture. Kaitha culture. This Chalcolithic culture was named after the type site of Kaitha, in Ujjain district, Madhya Pradesh. Sorry, the type site. Did you get this point of type site? What is this type site? No, Harappa was the type site. Now you got it, right? The first excavated site, and on the name of that we try to put the name of culture only, right? So Kaitha was the first excavated site, and this particular term or idea is known as type site, right? So that is supposed to be the type site, right?
So that is
TYP type site. Over 40 settlements of the Kaitha culture have been so far discovered in that region, and most of them are located on the tributaries of the Chambal river. They had their own ceramic style. Any sort of pottery which has been developed by burning it. I mean heating. If you are any sort of pottery which has been created by heating the clay.
nowadays
Ceramic. क्या बोला मैंने? Ceramic style. Ceramic style includes bowls, 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 high and short necked, NECKED, necked storage jars, basins, etc. Similarities are evident with the study painted pottery found at some pre-Harappan sites. Apart from this, use of both copper and stone tools, copper and stone tools were also found. Are also found. An evidence of specialized blade industry, an evidence of specialized blade industry What did you write? Specialized blade industry has been also found which definitely gives the evidence of mass production of chalcedony blades, chalcedony, CHALCE, chalcedony, chalcedony blades. These people were well versed in making jewelries and beads. Most of such stuff have been received inside a house. Change the paragraph. People lived in small huts with well-rammed, R-A-M-M-E-D, well-rammed floors and wattle, W-A-T-T-L-E, wattle and daub walls, D-A-U-B, daub walls, supporting a thatched, T-H-A-T-C-H-E-D, thatched roof. A mixed economy was practiced as seen from mixed economy was practiced as seen from evidence of subsistence farming, evidence of subsistence farming, stock raising, and hunting and fishing. Stock raising, animal husbandry, stock raising, and hunting and fishing. The popular crops among them was wheat and barley, goats and sheep were the domesticated animals, and most strikingly, horse remain has also been found change the paragraph. This culture is supposed to be the earliest Chalcolithic culture in India. The sudden end of this culture is ascribed to an earthquake. Next, Ahar culture. What did he say? All the time Total keeps on giving the expert comments.
Sir, maybe
You don't understand earthquake. अच्छा. कोऑपरेटिव नेचर का है थोड़ा सा. Right? Next is Ahar culture. This culture is also known as Banas culture. As this valley is known with the same name. Where the most of the sites are located. This region is rich in mineral deposit in mineral deposits. This region is rich in mineral deposits, and archaeologists suggest from available evidence that this region also supplied copper to the Harappan sites. Copper to the Harappan sites. Change the paragraph. More than 60 sites have been discovered so far. But Ahar and Balathal are excavated extensively. But the decent discoveries have also taken place in Gilund and Bagur. In Gilund and Bagur. This culture gives clear evidence of two different stages period 1 and period 2. Period 1 and period 2. Period 1 and period 2. The first period is Chalcolithic and the second is early historic. Early historic. Early historic means people, it is basically from that phase where people have started writing. The early references of writing could also be seen, and that is why it could be included in early historic, right? Change the paragraph. Balathal gives evidence for extensive ceramic styles and detailed studies have been done for this. Done. The people from this culture were using mud or mud bricks, for making houses, This culture was using multiple kind of pottery, and initially it was the black and red ware, the other pottery styles used by them were the study redware, study STURDY, study redware, STURDY, study redware, and red slipped ware, SLIPPED, slipped ware,
WARE
WARE, utensils, painted ware, etc. Few stone implements were also used by them. Stone stuff were also used by them. This culture initially had mixed economy. In the next stage, this culture has become more mature, which is evident in the ceramic types used by them. The next phase, or the mature phase, witnessed a large number of settlements, and the emergence of a few key sites, and many satellite sites. Got the point? You all got it? What development I am talking about? Now what is happening? So far it was a rural culture, and in fact in Ahar culture you'll find multiple stages are there, right? So in the first stage I just told you it was very simple, but in the second stage I told you that they have started using multiple pottery, and in fact the potteries are proving that they have started using, they are becoming very, sort of specific regarding their pottery, And the second thing, you will find certain key sites came into existence, and apart around the certain key sites we will find the satellite sites. It means out of those sites, one site became prominent. And what is it all about?
One side is key site and the other side.
So what does it mean?
Towards urbanization.
Exactly. Now the relationship that we have developed so far, that relationship started. Right? In what way? The central site somehow is becoming more urban, and whether rest of the sites are becoming rural, right? So that tendency now could be seen in the second stage. Basically is the second stage. In fact, there were 4 stages in this Ahar culture. I am not going into that much detail because it is not required. You just remember that few stages were there, right? So apart from these 2 stages, right? Apart from the 2 stages that I have discussed initially, this is the Chalcolithic stage and the early historic stage. Within this Chalcolithic stage you will find 4 more stages, right? So in the first stage you will find that it was quite simple, but in the second only they have started showing the tendency of such kind of things, like, right? So this is the important thing, right? Carry on. At the same time, a uniform settlement pattern is seen. A uniform settlement pattern is seen at all the sites with certain additional features. At some sites, like a fortified enclosure, at Balathal. Houses are now made of stone, mud and mud brick, At Balathal, the fortified enclosure is centrally located and surrounded by the residential complex. The reason for such planning remain unknown till today. Another remarkable feature in this stage was storage. Industrial activities, even the industrial activities were noticed for mass production of ceramics, metalworks, and beadworks. refinement of technology is seen at this stage with the invention of fast wheeled even the technology used for making pottery, also got refined, such as decoration, polish, and other things, and other methods applied into pottery. The copper ore mines are also discovered in a close proximity to the site, to the culture. I hope you got the point. It is not only about one change, multiple changes could be seen in this culture or in this stage. So now the first thing, it is about their settlement pattern, right? And in fact, as I told you, that the uniformity, that is very unique, right? So in fact, they have also started making some of the settlements in the uniform pattern. So everywhere you will find the common pattern which was followed by them was that central part was enclosed, right? Or we can say fortified. That was the central part. Around the central part of the fortified we find fortified construction, we find the houses were built, right? So apart from that, they are talking about the advanced level of technique, like the wheel are made in different styles. I hope you might have noticed that the wheels are not very simple always, such as what are the techniques that could be seen in wheels? Cycle, circle. The wheels are always circle. Yes, initially we have just cut a piece of wood, right, and we just put a hole here, right? Then what happened? Definitely it is bulky, right, and then it is not giving that soccer wala feeling, right? And then what we did actually, just putting by some stuff here and then spokes, right? And then we started putting a sort of a metal, we just try to cover the wheel with the help of metal, right? So these kind of technologies could be seen among the the Chalcolithic people in the second stage, right? And apart from that, we'll find that certain other techniques have also been used by them, such as now their pottery became more and more advanced, right? That is one feature that could be noticed, right? So somehow we can say that these people have now started moving towards this urbanization, because these are the features could be discussed for the urbanization. Although I told you that why this pattern is seen among these people, that the fortified part was central and rest of the houses were around the fortified part, that is a sort of curious question for the historian, because normally when we talk about fortification, it includes the houses also. That's the normal pattern. But why the houses remain outside of the fortification, that's a curious question. And the other thing, that the copper was locally available, and in fact the mines which were located in the close proximity, and we never found a distance more than 32 kilometers from the sites, right? So somehow 32 kilometers is not a huge distance, right? So it means that they have extensively started using the copper or excavating mining or quarrying copper, right? So that's the another thing which mark the difference, and just because of that we can say that now these people from Balathal specifically have come to the next level of development, and from here they could go to the next level, right? Okay, fine. Change the paragraph. The Ahar culture, they have started producing rice also, apart from wheat, barley, millet, etc. Even the domestication of animals also went to the next level, as some other species such as cattle, buffalo, goat, sheep, pig and dogs were domesticated. These signs definitely indicate towards. Sorry. This one. We have ample of evidences. For hunting wild animals as well. So it could be concluded that they had a mixed economy of cultivation and hunting gathering. Change the paragraph. As for the social organization, one cannot rule out the presence of specialized classes of craftsmen. But on the basis of limited nature of evidence, it is not known whether it was a chiefdom society, the evidence of fortification at Balathal, implies that there may have been internal conflicts. A large number of bull figurines appearing in appeared from the end of mature ahar phase has been ascribed with ideological meaning, but nothing concrete can be said. Sorry? What did I say?
What can be said? Nothing concrete can be said.
Nothing concrete can be said. Nothing concrete can be said. Change the paragraph. An inhospitable climate experienced during the end of the second millennium BC led to the termination of farming culture in southeastern Rajasthan, caused the decline of ahar culture in the next southeastern Rajasthan, caused the decline of the ahar culture in the next stage. As this culture was advanced as compared to the other contemporary cultures, that is why some scholars accepted the West Asian influence over it. But this idea has been negated by the recent researchers, and they highlighted an affinity between the Ahar culture, and Chalcolithic cultures in Gujarat. Chalcolithic cultures in Gujarat. Chalcolithic cultures in Gujarat. Right? So this is the second culture that could be seen, right? And again I told you that once we find that it was more advanced, controversy started, right? And I just told you ki yes, there were so many signs which, don't you find the similarities between the Harappans and the Chalcolithic cultures? Most of the things are quite same, but definitely the Harappans were more advanced. We can't say it was replica of the Harappan, but whenever we find that it was having an advanced level of life, people have started suggesting the Western influence, and that is where this theory came. But later on, instead of focusing on that, these people have started focusing on some other things, like this culture had close affinity with this or connection with the Chalcolithic cultures in Gujarat. So they are saying it is not like that, they had certain connection with the West Asian people. Rather, it was a sort of indigenous development because of what it emerged, right? So now we are just left with two cultures, Malwa and Jorwe, right? So that will be covering tomorrow, right? So after covering this Malwa and Jorwe, we'll talk about some other things, such as, I think if any as such question is coming which is asking you about the Chalcolithic culture as an advanced stage, right? In that case, you have to put such kind of references, like you are quoting the Ahar culture. Abhi, there was one more important point which is still left that will come gradually, that is Inam Gaon, right? Inam Gaon and Daimabad, right? These are supposed to be the biggest sites in Chalcolithic cultures, and somehow the same kind of evidences were presented by them also. So somehow, look, we definitely do have limitations of the evidences, right? We have very limited evidence, right? And that is why what is happening, it is very tough to say anything very confirmly. But at least the archaeological sites are proving something. Such as at the one label I just told you about the fortification, right? And mind you, one thing that is pretty sure, that whenever the notion of surplus comes into the society, the classes are obvious, right? And in fact, it has been a biggest negative argument that has been given for Harappan civilization, that if the Harappans have reached to that label, right? If the Harappans had reached to that label without classes, how is it possible, right? And that is why some of the people are proving. I didn't discuss while discussing the Harappans, but if we'll talk about the Harappans, there is another evidence, because as people have started raising questions, this kind of uniformity, right, and consensus doesn't seem practical. Getting my point or not? Like there's a class which the class is emerging, and that class you are becoming ready to give the surplus to the that class, and without having any or without doing any resistance, you are accepting the subjugation, right? That's a big question. And more or less it has been said that whenever you find that the state is coming into existence, right, there is a class which is taking place, and in the class normally there is a section. That section somehow defeated the existing society, and they had to accept the sort of subjugation, right? So that's a common trend, and it is more or less accepted by the historians. And as Harappa is not presenting any as such evidence for the class, and that's supposed to be a big question for them. So and that is where some of the people desperately try to find out certain connection between these two. And in fact, just before the mature phase, we'll find certain evidences of certain burnings of certain sites. Getting my point? Nahi samajh paya. If there is any culture and the whole culture has been burnt, right, and above that you are developing a new culture, right? So there should be some meaning of it.
Yes.
It might not be coincidence for all the sites or most of the sites. There might be sort of accident which can take place in any of the site, ki theek hai, aag lag jati hai and they could not handle it, right? But can't you say, you cannot say this, ki almost all in every site you'll find that there was a label where the society was burned. Now it had so many meanings. Maybe they had this idea of making the planned city, and that is why whatever the culture living in that area, they just, it may be possible ki after, evacuating the, region, they might have burnt it completely and they made it plain. They would have made it plain, and then they would have constructed the cities. There's one possibility of this also, but somehow you just remember that at least it is simultaneously, it might be evidence of the classes, right? So it's very much possible that there were any sort of class took place, right? And because of that class, it is coming. Because ultimately, as I told you, that the whole story is about surplus, right? And whenever the surplus is coming into existence, the classes are happening. Because once the surplus is there, so definitely it's a common trend, because before the coming of the surplus, most of the society was all same, right? They were just going through a similar kind of economic startup, right? But now what is happening, out of these sections, some try to to capture the surplus, and for that there might be some struggle, right? And that is where struggle is very much required. And in fact, that is why I hope you must be knowing about that every change is coming after the struggle only. So they are saying that before urbanization, definitely there should be some signs of classes, and that is why they are giving the evidence of Harappan fortification, that it might be possible it was not because of the flood, rather it was for the internal disputes, but the absence of weapons somehow, that's another mysterious question in the IVC. So when we apply the same idea even in the Chalcolithic period, we can say one thing, that during the Chalcolithic period, again the fortification, right? So if the fortification is coming, so we cannot say anything confirmedly about the political structure or the culture they had. Right, it is very tough to be said. But at the same time, fortification at least carrying some idea regarding classes and other things, right? So there might be a possibility that they were aware of, or they were scared of any sort of attack, and that is why these people they would have started making the fortifications, right? So so many changes are coming simultaneously, as I told you, about the changes which were coming in agriculture, the changes which came in animal husbandry or the pastoralism, the changes which is coming into the technology, because now they had better or advanced technology. So as a result of that, they would have produced the surplus, and maybe that surplus was stored or sort of captured by a particular section, and that section always preferred to live in a fortified house, and that is where the use of stone started, right? And as the use of stone started, as a result of that, what happened? The houses were built in a more advanced way or more better way. So somehow there were numbers of changes which started occurring here, and that is why, if all such kind of things are happening, so very easily we can say that definitely they got this, we can say that they had this tendency to urbanize. Still the arguments are incomplete, because we haven't discussed so far Inamgaon and Daimabad. So once we'll discuss the Inamgaon and Daimabad, so the things should be very clear. So basically there are two types of questions that could be discussed here, right? So one question is regarding the potential to be urbanized, right? And the another question is regarding their social organization, right? So this possibility is there, because some good works have been done on these two dimensions. So yes, we'll discuss these two dimensions on partially we have discussed one dimension, and we'll complete the second dimension tomorrow, and of course we'll complete the first dimension tomorrow, and of course the second dimension as well in tomorrow's class, right? So tomorrow hopefully the Chalcolithic would be over, and we'll begin with Vedic, right?